In a nutshell, Wuthering Heights is the story of an impossible toxic love between an upper-class woman and a mistreated orphan, who will not rest in peace until he has horribly punished not just those who wronged him, but also a new generation of innocents. In this video, I will analyze the novel, mainly considering its writer's secluded way of life, her family, her literature, and the wild nature of the moors that were everything for her, and she turned into this book full of social struggles, passionate feelings, and illness. This novel was written during the Victorian era, a time in which British society was characterized by its strong moral values. Religion and family were the core of the Victorian morals that proclaimed virtue as the most important trait of an individual. The distinctions between the rich and the poor, the South and the North, and men and women were starkly established. If coming from a decent family, men had to be well-educated and chivalrous, while women had to be pure and submissive. There was zero tolerance towards violent passions, and notwithstanding a new growing middle class, the lower classes were expected to be born poor and die the same, because property was the main source of economic power, and hard work was not a way to thrive socially. With such rooted values, it is not a surprise that Wuthering Heights was reviewed by its contemporaries in 1847 as a compound of vulgar depravity and unnatural horrors. The majority were puzzled by the savagery and rudeness that it depicted. Some even advised people not to read it, but to burn it. Nevertheless, all were interested in the mysterious background of its author, who was believed to be a man named Ellis Bell, that was actually the male pseudonym of Emily Jane Bronte, an English novelist and poet who died thinking her book was a failure. Emily spent her life in Yorkshire, with her two sisters, Anne and Charlotte, and her brother Branwell. Motherless and with a father occupied entirely with his job, the Bronte children were educated at home by their aunt Elizabeth, who provided them with several materials of the era, like magazines the children used as inspiration for developing their artistic skills. All the Bronte children turned out to be amazingly gifted. Branwell painted, and Anne, Charlotte, and Emily became highly regarded novelists, with works such as Jane Eyre and Agnes Grey. There is nothing certain about Emily's personality. Most of the information concerning her character was reported by her sister Charlotte, who might have exaggerated Emily's shyness and introversion. In general, it is believed that she was a rebel soul with a burning passion for nature, animals, and everything wild. She was evidently in love with the Yorkshire moors, her dog Keeper, and every time she was away from home, she became homesick and immediately returned. Emily's interest in literature included Shakespeare, Byron, Shelley, and the most recent work on evolution. She and her sisters are generally regarded as Gothic writers when the Gothic genre was in its golden age. Wuthering Heights is classified as a romantic Gothic novel. On the one hand, it includes deviant evil characters, supernatural ominous settings, nightmares, and monsters fueled by superstition. And on the other, there are romantic, melancholic characters desperate for love and prone to surrender to their deepest passions. However, Wuthering Heights' genre could be more precisely described as dark romanticism, for all the psychological affectation its characters suffer, the wickedness lurking inside everyone, and the tragic role of fate. The novel follows two families, the Earnshaws and the Lintons. There is an ensemble cast in which the protagonist as well as other roles are switched as the plot progresses. One of the early examples of this switch is evinced in the narrator, who is a man named Mr. Lockwood in the first chapters, and then he leaves the task to a woman named Ellen Dean. The story begins when Lockwood gets tired of the busy world of the South and seeks for isolation in the moors of northern England. He rents a place named Thrushcross Grange and goes to visit his landlord at Wuthering Heights. There, he quickly finds himself inside a madhouse of wicked people, has nightmares, sees a ghost, and falls ill when he returns to the Grange. During his illness, He asks Elendine, his housekeeper, to tell him the story of the people inhabiting the heights. Both Lockwood and Ellen are unreliable narrators who cannot read other people's mind and mix their morality with the story they are narrating. They help to create a mysterious atmosphere and foreshadow everything that will be presented in a sort of circular flashback. In order to facilitate the analysis, I divided the story into 3 parts. Each of them has love as the main element, but they differ in the way it is explored. I call the first part Love and Pride. Until the 17th chapter, we are told the story of the upper-middle-class Earnshaw family. Mr. Earnshaw and his daughter Catherine show a deep attachment for Heathcliff, an adopted kid, and that enrages the biological son Hindley. After the death of both Earnshaw parents, Hindley becomes the master of Wuthering Heights and with his wife tortures Heathcliff. Meanwhile, Catherine gets acquainted with the neighbors at Thrushcross Grange, Edgar and Isabella Linton. With them, she becomes a lady, and when thinking of marriage, she decides it is better to socially thrive, marrying Edgar, and not to become a beggar marrying Heathcliff. Until this part of the story, we see Heathcliff as a romantic tragic hero who desperately wanted to be given the opportunity to raise his social status to be with his love, but that was ultimately despised by a racist society for being an orphan. We also see how his relationship with Catherine changes for the worse. At the beginning, Heathcliff states he wouldn't change his place at Wuthering Heights for that of Edgar at the Grange, but as Catherine gets closer to Edgar, his pride is wounded and he ends up bitterly envious. Catherine is another character moved solely by pride. However, she states such passionate love for Heathcliff that her words are quoted nowadays by many couples. She says he is more herself than she is, and whatever souls are made of, his and hers are the same. Nevertheless, not all that platonic love can bring her to degrade herself, and she marries Edgar, hurting Heathcliff's pride and making him escape. After 3 years away, Heathcliff returns as a rich gentleman. At this point, it seems that all possible goodness has left him, and he begins to torment Catherine with constant quarrels and marrying Isabella, her sister-in-law, until Catherine falls ill with sorrow and dies while giving birth. Without Catherine in his life, Heathcliff spends his day ruining his stepbrother to death by making him mortgage the house and turning his son, Hareton, into a little brute servant. He also mistreats his own wife until she escapes while pregnant. Now, the true character of Heathcliff is revealed as a villain, but there are other characters worth mentioning too. First, Hindley, Heathcliff's stepbrother, is said to have been inspired by Emily's brother Branwell, who struggled to keep a job, felt worthless, and developed an addiction to opium after having an adventure with a married woman. Then, there is Isabella Linton, Heathcliff's wife. She is presented as being jealous of her brother's achievements and desperate to find a husband. Isabella is the typical oppressed female Gothic character who cannot escape patriarchal society. She narrates one part of the story describing Heathcliff's treatment towards her, which is one of the most shocking forms of misogyny displayed in the novel. He treats her like a child because, being a woman, she couldn't manage the Grange. That was the property her parents left her and the only reason why Heathcliff married her. Isabella ultimately regrets having married Heathcliff, but her pride makes it impossible to ask for help. She conceals her suffering and runs away to the south to raise her child alone. Another important aspect here is the role of the paternal figures. Just as it happened to Emily, there is almost an absolute absence of the mother figure and an intimidating figure of the father. That will be developed in the part of the book I call Lavanpity, from chapter 18 to 30.
I have no pity, I have no pity. The more the worms writhe, the more I yearn to crush out their entrails. It is a moral teething, and I grind with greater energy in proportion to the increase of pain.
Do you understand what the word pity means?
Those are words uttered by Heathcliff that will explain some of the events that unfold. Years go by, and from now on, the story revolves around another generation of characters. First, we have the story of Cathy Linton, Catherine's daughter in Thrushcross Grange. She grows up, and as Heathcliff wants to steal her home and torment her father, he deceives her into marrying his terminally ill son, Linton. Cathy is kidnapped and brutally beaten with this purpose until she finally managed to escape. After her father's death, Heathcliff, her new legal tutor, takes her back to Wuthering Heights, where she is left helpless and alone with her husband, whose sickness deteriorates until he dies of neglect. In this second part, we clearly see the change of roles. Now, Cathy is presented as the tragic Gothic heroine who has to fight against a male villain. Additionally, all possible love of this part derives from pity. Cathy could have avoided her cousin, but Heathcliff manipulated her compassion until he had her under his control. Truth is, Cathy loved Linton as a little brother, and marrying him was kind of incestuous. What's more, throughout these chapters there is an unnatural depiction of family ties. Ellen lies to Linton, telling him his father will love him, but Heathcliff is so utterly disappointed with him, he even admits he wished Hareton was his child. Thus, Heathcliff doesn't find any other purpose for his son than to turn him into a puppet to manipulate Cathy, and he does so gaslighting and mentally abusing the boy to the point of delirium. Linton also affirms there should be nothing more powerful than a marital relationship, but his father insists he should be violent towards Cathy. And the last one says people are incapable of hating their siblings, despite her own father's behavior towards her aunt. Another leitmotif of this part is illness and distrust in medicine. The only doctor of the whole novel, Kenneth, is depicted as a rough person who suggests it is better to let troubled people die. As another example, after Linton's marriage, his illness gets worse and Heathcliff advises Cathy to lock him up until he dies, because his life is not worth the pain. Emily herself is believed to have said she would have no poisoning doctor near her and refused to take medication when dying of tuberculosis. In fact, almost her whole family died very young due to terrible sanitary conditions. The last element I regard important here is religion. The servant Joseph is the most prominent religious character of the novel. He is always scolding somebody with his thick Yorkshire dialect in the name of God, and in many cases he is an antagonist. Probably this evangelical persona was molded after Emily's aunt's religiosity. However, Christian beliefs and superstition are present in the whole novel, for example in Linton's and Cathy's sublime description of their perfect heaven's happiness. They show a strong contrast of personalities and of ideal heavens. Linton wishes for calmness and Cathy for wildness, but both agree that heaven is a place on earth, just like Catherine and Heathcliff before them, who regarded the moors as their paradise. Catherine tells Ellen she believes she has nothing to do in heaven, but rather her soul will be in the moors after her death. And when she exclaims that if everything perished and Heathcliff alone remained, she will continue to exist, she confirms her belief of the immortality of the soul, a theory that seems to match Emily's beliefs, for her most famous poem, No Coward Soul Is Mine, talks about that personal relationship to God and nature that cannot be destroyed with death.
Though earth and man were gone, and suns and universes ceased to be, and thou were left alone, every existence would exist in thee. There is not room for death, nor atom that his might could render void. Thou art being and breath, and what thou art may never be destroyed.
In this final part from chapter 31 to 34, that I call Love and Peace, we finally find redemption for the remaining characters. Firstly, we have a scene in which Cathy and Hareton's relationship is worse than ever. Hareton seemed to be infatuated with Cathy since they met, but because Linton and she ridiculed him for his ignorance, he gave up his desire for knowledge and dedicated to his mundane tasks. This is a situation that extremely resembles when Catherine rejected Heathcliff for being poor. Now the possibility of redemption for their parents' mistakes is open, and peace between the two families can be established when sometime later Hareton and Cathy are a happy couple thanks to Ellen, who returned to the Heights. Cathy is somehow a teacher for Hareton, and both love walking in the moors. Probably the most thrilling aspect of these chapters is Heathcliff's death, who began living a lonely life with no food, company, or rest of any kind. Actually, Heathcliff is a very complex and unique character throughout the novel. As we have seen, he changes from being a tragic hero to an antagonist. Some say he is a Byronic hero for his wildness, loneliness, hatred, and revengeful heart, but due to his apparent sociopathy and to his own words to Isabella, saying that she mistook him for a hero of romance, I prefer to see him as a villain protagonist, because his ultimate goal was to make people miserable, and he continued doing so after the death of those who had hurt him. Moreover, Heathcliff is also perceived by other characters as a monster. He is said to be a vampire, a goblin, and a ghoul, this last one being the closest to his fascination with corpses. Catherine also appears as a supernatural being in the form of a ghost, yet she is never depicted as an evil monster, but as a tormented spirit whose only aim is to claim Heathcliff's soul and merge with it, which she seems to achieve when Heathcliff dies near a window in the night. Personally, I found the characters were the most interesting element of the novel. They are complex and it is impossible to classify them accurately. They can be charming at first and then turn into selfish, detestable beings. All of them are difficult to relate to, in my case especially Mr. Heathcliff, who, after the first chapters, committed almost every crime possible and finally obtained what he desired, to be buried by Catherine's side. Anyway, I like the way the book defied the standard moral values of the Victorian times and even found it a bit shocking for nowadays society too. As for the question if it is a happy ending or not, Lockwood just concludes they are at peace.
I lingered round them under that benign sky, watched the moths fluttering among the heath and harebells, listened to the soft wind breathing through the grass, and wondered how anyone could ever imagine unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in that quiet earth.